Hello again, it's John, the Old Geek, and I'm back with another old school module review. Tonight I'm going to be doing something different. I'm not going to be reviewing the next one in the UK series because even though I own both UK 6 and UK 7, I've never actually run them. And how can I review something properly, in any detail, with any balance, if I haven't actually run it myself? I am going to stick with the same era of modules though, and I'm going to pick another module from 1984 to show what was coming out at the same time as the UK modules, and therefore this review is going to be on the subject of C3, the Lost Island of Castanamir. Before I get on with the review, I'm going to show you a list of modules that TSR published in 1983 and 1984. And if you look at the list, you can see I've highlighted in blue the ones from the UK series. And 1983 had some strong releases. A classic in Ravenloft, Oasis of the White Palm was a good one as well. So 1983 wasn't that bad. But if you look at 1984, look at all those I've highlighted in red. Those are all tie-ins or series of modules. The Conan series, jumping on the back of the popularity of the Conan the Barbarian films. And then there's 5 Dragonlance modules released in a single year. The other ones released, well, there's not a lot of quality amongst them, so this shows why the UK series stood out quite so much. Anyway, I digress. On with C3. Lost Island of Castanamir is a competition module written and published in 1984 by Ken Ralston, who was to go on and write the absolute classic RPG Paranoia. But was he any good at writing D&D adventures? Let's have a look. Now, firstly, competition modules. They were a curious breed. The first two in this C series, C1 and C2, Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan and the Ghost Tower of Inverness, were both published 4 or 5 years beforehand, so they were reincarnating this series for the purpose of this module. Competition modules were tended to be played in a single session or maybe 2 sessions, and in the case of C3, it is designed to be run over 2 sessions, with distinct parts of the adventure in each session. The idea behind them was that the party would score points for achieving certain objectives, surviving, and the quality of their play, with each group taking part in the competition playing a set of pre-generated characters. The nature of the competition meant that the module designers generally had to create an adventure with a high proportion of puzzles and tricky, often dangerous mental challenges. After all, competitions are meant to be a challenge in order to differentiate between the groups who would all be playing the adventure at the same time, competing against each other. Now, this design goal commonly led to the adventures being somewhat disjointed in feel, with little care being given to the sense of realism demanded by an adventure intended for campaign play. However, many of the greatest TSR modules began life as tournament adventures, proving that it was very much possible to create a good adventure within the confines of the tournament criteria. C3 is unusual in a sense, as it's a low-level tournament module. Most of them are aimed at what was known as the sweet spot of adventuring, levels 4 to 7, those mid-levels where characters are a bit more robust and had more abilities at the player's disposal in order to solve the problems in the adventure. Now, with that background out of the way, let's dive in with the first part of the review that I usually do, and that is a presentation. Now, at first glance, the Lost Island of Castanamir looks rather impressive. As a 14-year-old, first seeing this module on the shelves, seeing this cover, I bought it. The cover art is a full-page image depicting a bizarre and terrifying creature seemingly emerging from a pool as the party nervously clutch their weapons. But what's that at the bottom? There is a small white dog yapping at them. Yep, a small white dog. So maybe this one's going to be a little bit strange, but as a 14-year-old, this one caught my eye. That piece of cover art is by Jeff Easley, who was one of the leading artists working for TSR at the time. His covers of the revised Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as the revised versions of the Monster Manual, were all really, really good. But the overall presentation of this adventure is very much one of style above substance. The artwork throughout is by Jeff Easley inside, and while that cover image is great, the inner images are technically really good as well and look really professional, but they do lack a little bit of personality. We feel a bit out of place in an adventure which tries its best to be weird and wacky. Maybe Jim Holloway's more humorous approach would have been more fitting, or perhaps Errol Otis with his bizarre images. Also beneath the gloss of the cover are a number of formatting errors. There's several instances of boxed text being erroneously boxed, or missing a box, as quite a few of the read aloud sections contain information that would only be gleaned by close examination by the players. And the maps themselves, they're not very good. They're difficult to read. They're not clear. They're cluttered. And they use a ridiculous scale of 1 square equals 4 feet. Why? Just change that to 5 feet and be done with it. So what about the contents of the adventure itself? Well, the setting is one of a remote rocky island, and the party are stranded there and have found an entrance leading to possible shelter. They have discovered the abode of a mad high-level mage, however, something which will become quite clear to them very soon. On passing through the entrance, they find themselves in a clean, tidy living room, meticulously so, as a small metal cleaning golem beetles back and forth, zapping dirt with its disintegration ray. Living in a closet are a pair of leprechauns, and so right away the tone of the adventure is set. Now there are a total of 18 encounter areas split over 2 levels. The first tournament session is designed to be the first 9 encounter areas, and the second tournament session is designed to be the upper level, where they are then trying to locate the exit. Each encounter area is linked by a series of teleport portals, which might sound like a good idea in theory, but in practice it's just frustrating, as returning the way you came in is no simple matter. Most of the locations fit to the theme quite well, with the lower level being living quarters, a kitchen, dining room, guest rooms and some entertainment areas, and the upper level is mainly laboratories, a library, a workshop, and stuff like that. There's a few oddities clearly added to challenge or merely delay a tournament group who are playing to a time limit. Now, encounters on the Lost Island are mostly with creatures that have been summoned by the mage himself, a bizarre race called Gingwatsim. A very silly name, but a potentially interesting creature. Now, Gingwatsim come in all manner of shapes and sizes. There's also a few other individuals trapped in the complex, whose fights are very much of the infrequent but deadly variety. Quite a few can be avoided, and that is something the players would be wise to do. So, it's unusual, and it's quite imaginative, but is it any good? Well, for the purpose for which it was written, probably. But few people buying the adventure would be doing so to play at a tournament. Most purchasers would be DMs looking for an adventure to slip into a campaign or to mine for ideas. For a 32-page adventure as well, it is very, very short, desperately so. The pre-gen characters taking up 8 pages, several pages of full-page artwork, which is quite nice, and there's loads of tournament notes and the like. The actual adventure takes up only about 13 pages of the 32-page booklet, with 2 of those pages dominated by large pieces of art. A number of the locations can be simply ignored by the party too. My current group, who can be an ill-focused rabble at times, completed the entire adventure in about 8 hours, and they went in every single one of the 18 rooms and poked around really thoroughly. A more direct group could do it in 5 or 6 hours, really easily. Sure, there are plenty of other TSR adventures which would have a similar number of pages of actual adventure, or even fewer. Tomb of Horrors, White Plume Mountain, for example, but they managed to pack in a lot more gaming time within those pages. Now, speaking of White Plume Mountain is perhaps the most famous funhouse adventure, and this adventure, Lost Island of Castanamir, tries its best to be a funhouse. It's almost as if it's trying to mimic the likes of White Plume Mountain or the Ghost Tower of Inverness, another good quality funhouse. and it just seems to miss. The fun just isn't quite there. It tries to be silly, and it tries to be imaginative, and yes, it is imaginative in places, but it just doesn't gel. Now, another problem with it, there's only 12 or 13 pages of adventure, and yet it has some of the most wordy descriptions I've ever read. Take the library, for example. It fills an entire page. Rather than describe it with the rambling text that it does, a diagram of the layout would have been much more effective and intuitive to use. There's very much the feeling that it's so wordy because the author needed to try and fill a defined page count, but there simply wasn't the depth of material there. Notes on converting the adventure for campaign play would have been useful, but there are none. If you do want to use it in a campaign, there are some major modifications that need to be made, as there are a number of potentially game-breaking items in the adventure. An Amulet of the Plains, for example. This is an adventure for levels 1 to 4 characters. The location will probably need to be moved too, but that's not a difficult job. I had the party pursuing 2 thieves into an area of recently drained marshland, where the thieves stumbled on the entrance and the PCs followed them inside, so that worked okay. But some of the encounter areas require very specific solutions, and the tournament characters are set up to solve those areas, and thus, if this is used in a campaign, the DM needs to take care to ensure the party have the means to solve those areas at their disposal. So, as you may have guessed, I'm a little negative towards this adventure. The Lost Island of Castanamir contains plenty of interesting ideas and locations. The fantasy room is one particularly good part of it. It made for some really interesting role-playing, but there's simply not enough of it. The end result is a short, disjointed, occasionally frustrating and irritating affair, mostly for the DM, as the amount of work that must be put into it in order to run it well simply does not translate into enough fulfilling gaming time for the effort to feel worthwhile. A group who enjoy a little bit of weirdness can get some fun out of it. My players seem to enjoy it. Ultimately, that fun will be far too brief. It's not an expensive adventure to pick up nowadays. You can get it for 10 or 15 quid. And for the purpose of completing a collection, it looks nice on the shelves. I mean, by all means, read it, laugh at it, mine it for the few good bits that it's got. Otherwise, don't bother. As I've said, Ken Ralston would go on to produce Paranoia, which is one of the finest role-playing games ever invented. So we can't be too harsh on him. In fact, he needs to be forgiven straight away. This was his low point, though. So, a rating, I'm going to be very generous and give it 3 out of 10. Well below average, and nowhere near as good as what TSR UK was putting out at that time. Well, that's been another review, maybe a little bit more controversial than the last few. If you agree with me, or if you don't agree with me, do leave a comment below, like, subscribe. You'll get another review in the next few weeks, I guess. So for now, good night.